Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. For everyone who's watching, let me introduce myself. I'm Rodrigo, the marketing leader here at Endless Access. So today I'm meeting with three amazing people. So we're going to have a very interesting conversation, and this is about the Endless operating system. So with me, I have Robin McQueen. Robin, if you like to introduce yourself and your position.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm Rob McQueen. I'm the CEO of Endless Access, based in Cambridge. And yeah, I've been with Endless for 10 years and also working before that in the GNOME kind of open source project as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rob. Sam.
Yes, I'm Sam Thursfield. I've been at Codethink since 2011 and been also involved in the GNOME community since a similar amount of time, or maybe more. And I worked there as a senior software engineer.
Wonderful. Thanks. And Mauricio, I'll pass it to you now.
Thank you. So I'm Mauricio Arriavalo. I've been with Endless for almost 3 years now. I drive initiatives that we run through the operating system to make it sustainable. And definitely for me, it's a very important work that we do to accomplish that and to make it sustainable in time. In the past, I've been always into technology. So I'm more than happy to be here and share the thoughts and how we are planning forward in order to make this happen.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. So a big part, I think, before we start talking about the operating system and all the things, updates, and kind of like the core topics that we have for today's chat, I think I actually want to pass it to Rob. And a big part of that is I want to kind of like, it would be great for anyone who's watching this and doesn't know anything about the Endless operating system and its history. I think probably that would be a great context to get us started, and then we can move from there. So, Rob, if you could share a little bit more about the history of Endless OS.
Yeah, so in one form or another, Endless has been running for, I think, 12, 13 years, and always looking at basically barriers to digital access across different communities around the world. The strategy and the priorities have changed over time, but the kind of core mission has stayed very constant. And it's really looking at what are the barriers that prevent people around the world from having the tools and the education that they need to access this kind of digital knowledge or digital creator economy. So a lot of innovation, science, technology, finance, all of these things happening around the world are done with technology, with computers. And there's a very sort of accelerating technology and development that goes on. And if you don't have a computer, if you don't have internet, if you don't have the skills or the confidence to kind of act within that space, then you're kind of a passive receiver of this technology. The world is shaped by technology or people who use technology, but you're kind of receiving that in a kind of passive way. And we kind of noticed this was also true around the way that people interacted with devices. If you have a phone or a tablet or an inexpensive device, and smartphones are now, there are more smartphones in the world than there are human beings. So quote unquote, everyone has a smartphone somehow, right? Or very many people have smartphones. They're optimized for a lot of kind of passive or consumption activities. So they're not sufficient by themselves to empower people as creators, to develop skills, to start to access kind of economic opportunity that comes from this digital world that we have. So Endless has always seen the computer as basically this tool. It's the vehicle with which you kind of enter into the digital world and the creator economy and the knowledge economy and everything that comes out from all of the many, many things that you can do with a computer as the tool in front of you. So we think about different barriers that prevent people from accessing technology, and sort of infrastructure or connectivity is one of them. And inside Endless OS, what we do is actually preload huge amounts of content. We partner with projects like Calibri from Learning Equality, and Kiwix, which is part of the kind of Wikimedia group of foundations. And they actually load content offline. So you don't need the internet. If you have the internet, you can sort of do transactions and commerce and things and community. But if you don't, and you still have access to these amazing resources, because you can fit an incredible amount of knowledge and resources on a very inexpensive hard drive or flash storage inside computers. And the other barrier we think about is a computer affordable? This is where Mauricio's team is doing amazing work in partnering the computer together with a financing plan so that you can make a laptop computer as this kind of productivity engine, make it affordable, make it accessible. But as a common thread through all of that, we've had Endless OS built with open source software, built on top of the GNOME desktop, the Linux kernel. We've had these pieces in place for as long as I've been in Endless, a bit longer, 11, 12 years. And we've had a very similar sort of technology stack over that time. We've used the Debian as a base distribution. So that's a very kind of long-standing open source kind of OS project. But then we've sort of processed and digested that and made it into our own thing in Endless OS. But that's been a common sort of technical strand of how we address both financing and pay-as-you-go and making laptops affordable, as well as kind of empowering users with technology that they're in control of. So they've got resources, they can access applications that work offline without subscriptions. And from there, you can then launch into kind of skills and access to digital opportunities.
Wonderful. So there's been 6 versions up to now of Endless OS, and probably this is a teaser that the conversation that's happening to is because there's the Endless OS 7 in the works. It's like that collaboration started here. So in a way, a little bit kind of like, if you could describe a little bit like those, like number 6, it's like, what is it? What is that? Where did it end, and why modernize the Endless OS now? And
yeah, I think maybe to answer that question, it helps to sort of go back a little bit and just understand how we've been working over time. We have a number of different programs inside Endless Access. The biggest project at the moment is actually building a learning community where kids come together and they collaborate with us and each other to build computer games. So they're developing digital skills there. That's in itself very complicated. We've got a platform team, we've got a learning team, we're building a game, and all of these things happening. So we're always looking at how we can efficiently deliver what we need in terms of the technology and the OS that supports the devices program. So there used to be a huge OS team that was like, we're developing our own version of GNOME. We were changing everything, redesigning the UI, doing research with users in favelas in Brazil and going to Guatemala and Mexico and Indonesia. And, this very sort of large and complex investment in really building huge amounts of kind of differentiation and customization in Endless OS. The reality of that is that's very expensive. It's very expensive to do. You go in, you change everything. And it's very expensive to maintain because one of the benefits of using open source and things like the GNOME desktop is there are hundreds of people, probably thousands of people contributing, applications, developing the desktop, the UI, all of the toolkits and everything around it. There are a lot more of them than there are, engineers within the Endless OS team. Actually, now the Endless OS team is kind of one full-time engineer and then, a few of us in the kind of management team providing support. And you just can't keep up. You can't outcode this open source kind of community and collaboration globally of many different companies, individuals building the GNOME desktop together. So we sort of learned that the hard way. Endless OS kind of originally was very kind of ambitious and was sort of rushing to build exactly what we wanted for our users, but without realizing the cost of all of those changes and divergence that we made. So in the past few years, especially since we transitioned in 2020 to become a nonprofit, we've had less money to throw at this. We have not wanted to basically have an engineering team as big as the GNOME team chasing after them. We've wanted to say, how can we be really efficient and deliver the core value of Endless OS without kind of reinventing the wheel and redoing everything in our own way. So there's been a big focus on basically managing the divergence between the Endless experience and the GNOME experience. And so some of that has been about really deciding what's important, what do we keep? And some of that has been about engaging in this broader open source process where we start to kind of advocate for and influence and take part in that process. We go into the GNOME design team with our designs and we come up with something better that meets the needs of the Endless users, as well as sort of respecting the existing needs and requirements of GNOME's other users. So we've been trying to move these things closer together so that Endless OS doesn't have to spend as much time and money maintaining our own experience and our own differences. And actually we bring GNOME and Endless into the middle where we're meeting kind of broader needs with less engineering spend on Endless's side because we've joined the pack and we've taken part in that wider development. So that's the kind of context. Looking at Endless OS 7 particularly, it's another step in that process. So rather than kind of having a Debian-based desktop where we've been using this existing kind of open source project, but really changing it quite a bit and changing the updater so that we're delivering updates using a system called OS Tree. We are instead looking at GNOME's own OS project. So kind of coming out of work on OS Tree actually came from GNOME, went to Endless, and now we're sort of going back to GNOME, their own OS project, where they're building a system that's kind of a recommended serving suggestion for GNOME. So it has all of the latest technologies. It is updated and maintained by the GNOME release team. So every time there's a GNOME release, necessarily GNOME OS is there with it, kind of keeping track of all of the changes that are made. So kind of by going back to the source and saying that we're going to get GNOME OS, actually GNOME and all of the other pieces behind it, we're going to get all of that from GNOME, and we're going to apply the changes that we want for Endless, then it becomes much easier for us to stay with the best innovations and the changes that GNOME is making, because we're 95% of what we're shipping is GNOME OS, and then we're adding the sort of few percent that really address the Endless needs. Okay, the offline content here, the pay-as-you-go system here, some changes to the usability based on the research that we've done with our users. But we're really only investing in those things that really give value to our users and to the programs that we're running.
Super helpful. Thank you so much. I guess probably that leads me to the next question, and I'll pass it to you now, Sam. So I guess probably for anyone who's watching this, it would be great to hear a little bit more about Codethink. Like a little bit kind of like what you do, your strengths as an organization, then a little bit about your role in all this project, and yeah, from your perspective, what made this collaboration technically interesting for Codethink?
Sure. Let's see if I can do this as fluently as Rob did. Codethink is a consultancy firm that's been around since 2007. Came initially from the open source movement in a sense, and has always been involved in trying to get more companies involved in open source and trying to build cool things with things that are developed in public. And over time, there's been a stronger and stronger focus on operating systems development and integration tools. So part of that is helping customers in industry with their Linux-based operating systems projects, which have got increasingly more complex over the last 20 years or so. And the problems of how to integrate everything together has got more and more complicated. In some cases, the tools haven't kept up. So some of the R&D we've done at Codethink over the last 10 or 15 years is trying to develop more scalable integration tools for operating systems. And probably the most successful outcome of that was BuildStream, which was first released in 2017. And one of the original goals of the BuildStream project was to clean up the way GNOME did releases, because at the time, the GNOME project had 4 different tools to use every time they made a release. And this was considered a little bit difficult to manage. So one of the original goals we had with BuildStream was try and make one tool that could do everything that the GNOME release team need to do. And such as producing the Flatpak runtime, producing the release tables, and producing GNOME OS. And that's mostly been a success thanks to a lot of close collaboration between GNOME and Codethink. And we're really excited to see Endless adopting BuildStream now as well as an outcome of that. It's obviously really great for us to have more people using the tools that we've created. We think they're great tools. And yeah, the GNOME OS project kind of grew out of GNOME Continuous, which was initially a research project back in 2011, and initially was just for testing in CI pipelines, and nobody ever thought you'd really use it. And then over time, people thought, well, I can use it in a virtual machine now. That's cool. I wonder if I could install it on my laptop. That would be even cooler. And some volunteers did some great work to get the initial hardware enablement going and get it so that developers could run it on their laptop. And from there, it's progressing more and more towards something for real world use, which is really, really nice to see.
That's pretty awesome. So Sam, so now that you were talking about it, and I see the value in the contribution and the alignment with this mission. A little bit kind of like, what was your role in this project?
So we were brought in mainly for our expertise and sort of history with with BuildStream and with these complex integration problems. And so my role was leading the team that was working with the OS leader Endless, which is Jan Hong, and with Daniel and with Rob, to figure out the foundations of Endless OS 7. So there were some tricky decisions about how we junctioned the GNOME project, how we update Endless OS in line with GNOME OS, and how we bring the 12, 13 years of Endless OS customizations from Endless OS 6 onto Endless OS 7. So that's where we did a lot of the thinking and where we were really
amazing.
with this team.
I think we are going to go into more detail in a little bit with that. Thanks for that. And now I'm going to pass it to Mao. Mao, I think from your point of view, leading the device access program at Endless Access, how does that connect to the real world needs and kind of like all the customers and people that your program is supporting? Like, yeah.
Well, I think thank you for that question, because yes, it connects very, very clearly, if I may. Whenever we approach, so the whole purpose for us is to scale up. We have this idea we need to achieve and reach out to like as many potential users as possible. And that's because we have this belief of the need of like having and putting this technology into people's hands and making sure that these first-time users have the best experience, they have the best offline content, that they have the best support. For us, it's not about just deploying a device. It's like it's a whole experience. That's why we call it a program. So in order to when we get to these different markets, in order to modernize the offering, we always have to think about what actually the customers need. And it turns out customers need different things today with respect to what they were needing 5 years ago. And that like change in behaviors, in needs, and technology, and access, that's something that we need to be as well very nimble about. We need to be able to actually react. So as Rob was saying, we need to now we can probably focus more on, okay, now we have this baseline of the operating system, then we can then focus more on the value delivery. That means that we can like keep like updating the offline content, that we can probably make sure that we can build better experiences, now leveraging the operating system. It's a very well established and robust foundation. But on top of that, then we can now focus on what we always say that it's our value proposition, which is we need to make sure that people get to use the device and they learn and they grow with it. So this modernization has everything to do with the lowering that friction with the end users and making sure that we can actually get to market faster. Therefore, then we can scale faster as well. We have this big number of billions of users in the world that we want to reach out to. So we need to make sure that we can accelerate that pace, because the thing is, it's urgent. Because if we are not able to get to a kid today and we get to that kid in 10 years from now, we are already late. And that kid that didn't have access to tools, in 10 years from now, he might be already out of the digital economy. So that's why being able to scale faster is so important. And in order to achieve that, then we need that flexibility. We need to be able to probably balance with multiple type of devices and hardware. So we need also that type of flexibility. And at the same time, of course, I mean, building more trust with partners, moving us from the point of we now have a way more robust platform that will allow us to like update constantly and more rapidly, and probably do more like tailor-made kind of things in the different geos. It's different the kind of needs and content, offline content that might be necessary for a partner and user in Latin America than what is necessary in Africa. So all these elements of flexibility, scalability, lowering barriers, and making sure that we can get to as many users as possible. That's part of that modernization, modernizing the program, the operating system, and the content continuously. And that's why this process is so important for the program.
So in a way that I want to connect this to now the technical part of things, because I feel like from what Rob and Sam were talking about in terms of like trying to connect these two important parts of Endless OS and its users and what's happening with also comes with like tons of constraints. And probably, Rob, this question goes for you right now, because the operating system, when it was designed for first-time users, and that is still true, right? So there are many constraints in terms of like bandwidth. I don't know if that's a constraint, because we're talking about users who probably don't have access to internet in many cases, and that's why the content comes pre-loaded. But thinking about the back of the operating system, what are the constraints that we started to see with the previous versions, and that's why kind of we're operating that? I mean, I think Mao, it was covering a little bit of that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of mentioned the cost of diverging, of having Endless OS being different to the kind of base projects. You know, the computer I'm using now, running Endless OS 6, we have a version of GNOME from, I think, 2 years ago. GNOME 43, a venerable release. But that means that we are missing 2 years of progress that the GNOME project has made. So, for example, there's HDR or functionality in the display system that is not available to Endless OS users, because that's the version of GNOME that comes with a version of Debian that we based on. So there's a kind of latency and a delay and a cost to moving these updates through the pipeline that we have. Maybe sort of going a level deeper into the kind of the technology, we kind of build all of the Endless OS customizations into Debian packages. So we actually have basically a Debian server, we have a build server, we have to write Debian packaging kind of instructions for all of the components in the OS we want to change. All of these get built, they put into a Debian repo, and then we have another part of the pipeline that's taking all of the Debian stuff and kind of unzipping them all and putting them into OS tree, which is actually how Endless OS delivers and manages the OS updates. Endless OS is kind of delivered as a sealed unit. It's more, if you think of it more like the ROM on an Android phone, like you just get one version, and then when you upgrade, you get the next version. So you don't have this kind of, Windows is now applying Service Pack 2, like Service Pack 3, reboot again, something like this. That doesn't happen at all. What happens is you get a notification saying there's a new version, and the next time you reboot, you have the new version. This is very much the experience that people are used to with consumer electronics. It's how Android delivers its updates. It's how Chrome OS delivers its updates. It's a very kind of just gets out of your way. The next day you have a new version. But the way that we build that, there's this kind of a lot of complexity and cost. We have to maintain a Debian infrastructure. If there's a new release of Debian, which is every 2 years roughly, or every 18 months, then suddenly everything's changed. We have to take every piece of Endless OS and move it and update it, and we have to update all these things and rebuild these things. It's very expensive. It takes like a few months last time we did it. And we're basically looking at, well, how do we get rid of all of this? How do we turn this off and stop having to do that? Because it's expensive that we have to go and look back through Endless OS every time. So the really interesting thing about BuildStream is that, and Sam kind of mentioned this kind of junctioning. Basically, we can take all of GNOME OS as delivered by the GNOME release team, and that has all of the latest components of GNOME. It has the latest desktop innovations. We've actually been supporting philanthropically developing new functionality in GNOME. So there's now a digital well-being and parental controls. So screen time limits and internet filtering and application kind of filtering. That's in GNOME. We helped to build it. It's not in Endless OS. Whoops. So we actually now have a process where we take everything that GNOME OS has, and without sort of breaking it into all these Debian packages and all of this build things, we actually have one repository that is basically the entire recipe for Endless OS that builds on top of everything from GNOME OS. So we can basically iterate very, very quickly. We can update the new version of GNOME OS and rebuild it, see what happens, or just tweak a couple of things here. But the sort of cost and the complexity of updating the base software so that we can update GNOME to get the latest features, we can have HDR support, improve the gaming performance, or we can get the new features and digital well-being. That is much simpler. But also our kind of iteration speed. Like we can just have one developer editing some files here and rebuild the whole OS, and then we have a new version that we can test, or we can send to Mauricio's team and we can test the functionality or what we've changed. We don't have to kind of put it through here, build this other thing, release this, update that, send this here. There's a lot of complexity that we can just get rid of. We're basically running, one developer is running one command. looking at one kind of source code repository that has everything that goes into Endless OS, and they're building the OS kind of in one step. And so there's a huge amount of power in that BuildStream process, because that developer is sitting, with one instruction, one tool, one OS, and we're able to sit, very sort of cheaply on top of everything in GNOME OS that's kind of brought in through this junction. So it's much easier for us to iterate and tweak, adjust, respond to market needs when we're in this BuildStream world, because we're a lot less of the complexity and the delay and the latency, Debian updates, we update, GNOME releases up. It's just in one place now that we're able to kind of do all of our OS kind of integration and iteration.
This is from the marketing side. Obviously, you illustrated that very nicely. I don't know if it was that simple. And Sam, probably, I'm looking at you now, in terms of the migration. Is it an easy transition to go from what we had, which is Debian, to now BuildStream and connecting that to GNOME? What were the challenges for you and the team when we're doing that, working on this?
Well, the process was that we kind of started again. So we took GNOME OS, vanilla GNOME OS, and we then started trying to make it look more like Endless OS 6. So EOS 7 is really a new thing, and which is much closer to GNOME OS. And then we cherry-picked bits of Endless OS 6 and started adding them on top. And some of that is actually under the bonnet. It's quite different, but hopefully the users won't notice too much. Probably the biggest single challenge was OS tree, which is a technical detail really, but it's something of a difference of opinion with the GNOME OS team, where Endless have been using OS tree for the last 12 years, and so we'll logically keep using it because it's very important that existing Endless OS systems keep working. Whereas GNOME OS upstream don't have that constraint, and so they're free to move away from it. So that took some work, but was less of a challenge than I thought, actually. I expected worse from that bit.
That's it. So I guess I think that you're already talking about the technical discoveries during the work that you were doing here. So I think that covers that. But in terms of those early decisions, which ones do you think are going to have the biggest impact? Because also a note here, probably we're already not done. The work is not done. The work that Sam and the team started in collaboration with our team is to get this started. So right now, Endless OS 7, for anyone who's watching, is not ready yet. But yeah, Sam, going back to that, is what those decisions, how will they impact in a positive way the experience for Endless OS 7?
Well, certainly the decision on OS tree has a positive impact for anyone that already uses Endless OS, because it makes it hopefully seamless for them to upgrade, which is really important. No one will need to reinstall or anything like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And probably, I guess, I'm thinking about the end users, because I think probably for you, Mao, the benefits of this for end users, or maybe Rob, this is a question for you too. Is there's how do you see this benefiting our team? Yeah, that we are delivering faster and improving our operating system, but what does that mean for an end user from your point of view?
Well, yeah, I think just being able to get the changes as they're made, it sounds like an obvious thing, but if your development cycle for the OS is kind of measured in years, which it is coming from Debian, unless we put a lot more kind of work and effort around it. If we're able to kind of update Endless OS every 6 months and we're able to sort of stay nimble, then that feedback loop between requirements coming from different deployments and different customers, and innovation coming from the GNOME kind of bigger team and all of the different apps and development that's done there, we're able to just get out of the way a little bit. We're able to just keep giving people the development and the innovation. And one of the things in maintaining an OS that you kind of have to do constantly is to just update the Linux kernel. So all of the device drivers, basically, and they're in a couple of places, but almost all of them have a component that lives inside the kernel. And there are a couple of other things like the graphics drivers that need to be updated and maintained. And if you have a newer computer, which we do, right, we're talking to our hardware partners, we're procuring new laptops at the moment to run with our programs, then the new computer needs new drivers because the silicon changes, new CPUs come out, new platforms come out, new graphics cards come out. So you always have to update parts of the OS in order for it to keep working with modern computers. You want apps that can still log into modern services, and you want to deliver the features as they're developed. So the biggest thing for the user is it keeps being updated and it keeps working. And this OS exists on new hardware because we can update it more cheaply and we can be quicker. We've been working on a pilot actually together with Raspberry Pi, where we've brought NSOS onto Raspberry Pi. And that's, again, new kernel and bootloader changes and graphics changes. But GNOME OS already builds on ARM, right? So you can sort of change one thing in the config file, and you can build, rather than GNOME OS for an Intel or AMD PC, you can build all of the same software for an ARM device like a Raspberry Pi. So it's really faster for us to be able to update and keep updating and just delivering all of this other value, like device drivers, optimizations, new features, upstream support for theming improvements in the GNOME desktop, like dark mode. Like the GNOME last year added dark mode across the desktop. You don't have that in NSOS. You can't do that. If you prefer that for your eyes or whatever reason, it's not available in NSOS. It's because it's slow and expensive and harder for us to update. When we release NSOS 7 and every sort of successive version after it, we'll be able to kind of get out of the way and just kind of pass on all of that innovation that's done at every level of the OS. Support for Thunderbolt devices, for example. There's some pieces somewhere in the middle of the OS that support, plugging in these wonderful docking stations that have PCI devices and, network adapters and, 6 screens and things. They probably don't work in NSOS. That component didn't exist as part of the stack when NSOS 6 was released, and now it does. So if you have one of those devices, it doesn't work in NSOS. So all of these things just coming smoothly, these innovations, this value add, the functionality and the hardware support that comes from all of these amazing open source projects that we build on, and this gets out of the way. We can send that very quickly every 6 months or more. If we need to update, we can do that much more quickly.
Wonderful. So you talk about a Raspberry Pi. I feel like you wanted to chime in on that one.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just would like to add on top of that what it represents for the user, which is pretty much, everything that Rob mentioned has everything to do with the user experience. So whenever they run into like something not working, whenever they find a barrier because there was something that they was supposed to work in a way that they were expecting, and we have to keep in mind that we're thinking about users that might be, in most of the cases, first-time users. So anything not working could be a blocker. And that could be actually a deterrent for them to actually leave the program. And then we don't accomplish our mission. So the user experience for me is the first thing that will be positively impacted by doing this, because of this ability, as Rob said, of having these updates will allow us to actually facilitate that constant renewal of what's going on under the hood. So that's a key thing. And then because we have that confidence, then as I mentioned earlier, we can then work more on feeding and nurturing more the value proposition and the content and the different type of things that we can provide to the users in order to innovate better. So I think that's definitely a win-win and more for the end users from the user experience perspective.
Wonderful. Mal, just a question there, and going back to a Raspberry Pi, I think that's an interesting new thing. It feels like in general, like Endless OS has been mostly shipped before on other devices. And why a Raspberry Pi now?
For me?
Yeah. Well,
yeah, because the whole play is about understanding the needs in different markets, and one key need is definitely affordability all over the place. So being able to be affordable and get to like price points where a regular laptop cannot get to, that's critical. So we've been facing that, and when we go into different projects in different regions, we identify situations in which some customers, even like low-income customers, or potential users, sometimes they can get to pay certain values that probably could be like coupled with a laptop, a good performing laptop, whenever you go with the same laptop, same solution for a low-income user in a different market, it turns out that that level of affordability is probably just 25% of what you see in other markets. So that's the need of us to actually being able to get to price points where definitely some other markets are not able to. The only price point where those other markets are capable of actually paying and actually find these solutions affordable. That's what actually led us in the first place to the Raspberry Pi form factor. That's one of them. There are others, but the fact that we have like everything in a system and we can like probably bring the peripherals in an optional or a bundling solution with the Raspberry Pi and other type of peripherals that the partners locally can provide. That's another element, very important element of as well affordability and flexibility, and as well on synergic effort with that partner. Because for instance, if we can partner with a partner that provides displays, then we have a win-win, because we have the Raspberry Pi, which is everything in the system. We just need a display. But guess what? This partner will partner with also deploy this type of peripherals. So it means that we can create some sort of bundles where the customer can pay less. Everything is bundled up in a very more efficient way. The partner wins because he's actually being able to bundle all the things, and we kind of get to that point of affordability where that we are aiming for. So that's the type of rationale behind it. It has everything to do with affordability and the better experience for the end user.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So moving on to, we have a couple of minutes before we have to wrap up, but I want to go into more a little bit like the technique, well, not the technical side, but a little bit like the essence of this project and its importance in the GNOME community. And I'll pass it probably to you, Sam. From your perspective, thinking about like, why should the GNOME community care about Endless OS 7?
Sure. Well, if we go back to why GNOME OS was created initially, it was to solve a problem that GNOME developers often had, where imagine you add a new feature to an application in GNOME, and 3 or 4 months later it gets released in a stable release, and then 3 or 4 months later after that it gets released by a distribution, and suddenly it hits 1 million computer users. And at that moment, you discover, oh, there's this huge problem and it doesn't work on half of the computers. But 8 months have passed since you did the original work, and especially if you're a volunteer, you've probably moved on. And now you don't have the capacity to go back and see what mistake you might have made 8 months in the past. So GNOME OS was created initially to kind of break that cycle and say, how quickly can we take a change and put it in a real operating system on a real computer and get people testing it? And that's still a big part of why we're excited to have GNOME OS in GNOME. And having Endless OS quickly following GNOME OS release cycles is going to be really helpful as well. It's another way for GNOME developers to get their changes tested early on. Of course, Endless OS has a sizable user base and distribution engineers working on the Endless team. So it's more testing and more feedback for the GNOME community.
Absolutely. And this is totally, oh, go ahead, Doro.
That also works both ways, right? I have a bug when I log in on an external monitor that the screen freezes for a few seconds. And this happens on Endless OS because I have a version of GNOME from 2 years ago. And if I turn up and talk to the GNOME shell team, I'm like, oh, hey, I have this weird like freeze. They're like, what version are you running? Like, oh, it's, GNOME 43. They're just like, what? I mean, can you try the latest version? Because that's not a bug that anyone else sees. So it must be because you have an old version. And yeah, I mean, probably it is because I have an old version. But that means that they can't really help me because the software that they've been working on has been changed, not beyond recognition, but immeasurably in the subsequent 2 years. So that I can't get them to help me because they don't know what I'm using something from prehistory as far as they're concerned. So there's two sides of that being able to kind of bring the users and the developers closer together makes it easier for both. It means that I get the bug fixes, but if I have bugs, I can talk to developers about fixing them as well. So that feedback loop, the iteration cycle gets smaller. And that applies both for GNOME developers getting their things in people's hands and the feedback being timely and actionable in the other direction.
Fantastic. I just thinking about like Sam, I mean, like we are definitely a little bit more connected to what Endless OS and its users is doing. But from you as an external member right now, a collaborator, I don't know if you like right now hearing a little bit more about like what Endless OS has been doing over the past years. If there's anything exciting about knowing that at some point Endless OS 7, with all the work that you did, is gonna reach out all these users, plus like the ones that we want to keep adding to the program. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to share there.
Yeah, well, one thing I learned actually while working on this project is how much work the Endless team have done over the last 12 or so years. So there's lots of features which have been added to all Linux distributions in the last 2 or 3 years. Maybe they've been added to systemd. And then going back through the history of Endless OS 6, I've made these discoveries of like, oh, the Endless people were looking at this in 2016 and actually opened the initial issue report against OS Tree or against systemd and were working upstream to make the change happen. So quite a lot of what is now in GNOME OS and in other distributions actually began life in Endless, and sometimes 5 or 6 or more years ago.
That's pretty cool. And I see Rob's, he's very happy to hear that. Like that gives him
Definitely.
joy.
Yeah. I mean,
So proud.
Endless OS was the first system to take OS Tree and actually deploy it in production. But Endless OS shipped it to the world before Red Hat did, and now Red Hat's entire like cloud container strategy is based on essentially OS Tree and projects that have kind of branched off OS Tree. So we've kind of been there, reshaping how the Linux desktop is put together, and that in turn has informed like how cloud native now uses Bootsy, and they look at containers and operating systems through the same kind of lens and same tooling. So there's a lot of sort of convergent evolution going on here, kind of as Sam said, some of these things where we said, great, let's have an atomic, you update it all in one OS. Like we did that much sooner with Linux than we did it before it was cool, right? But then we helped to make applications work in that world. So make Flatpak work. And now, FlatHub is this app store that we helped start, and it has 4 million users, something like this, billions of downloads a year. It's the default in, Valve Steam Deck, and, dozens of other Linux distributions use FlatHub by default. And, again, these are kind of planting the seeds that came from the Endless OS team working in all of these different spaces. And we kind of helped, I hope, to kind of lift, all of these different projects and different communities around the whole kind of Linux space and Linux desktop. So it gets good to hear that from Sam.
Yeah, it is.
A couple of things.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been an amazing conversation. We're going to be wrapping it up, but I want to just thank Sam, who joined us today to talk about all the work. For anyone who's watching, the Endless OS 7 work is not there yet. So we're going to be updating our social media channels with information about what's happening, more work that's coming up with it. And when it gets released, I expect more information, the release news and the notes. And I just want to thank Sam again for the time. Thank you so much as well, Mauricio and Rob, for joining me today. And we will stay in touch. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'm going to start recording now.
Thank you.